From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Digital Banter. As always, you have myself, Andy Groller, and James Kravick as your co-hosts.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Exactly. Happy New Year. We are beginning 2023 off strong with a topic that's probably going to resonate with a lot of folks out there, especially if they're staying up to date with the latest things happening in the marketing world, because today's topic is about the role of AI and especially ChatGPT in your marketing. As many of us saw over the holidays and preceding that, ChatGPT kind of blew up as far as the news cycle is concerned, especially as a result in marketing strategy, marketing shifts, tests, experiments, and things like that. So that's really kind of what today's conversation is going to be about, but also just boiling that up to the larger AI systems that exist out there and how we as marketers can take advantage of them, and also what we need to take into consideration as we embark on this new year and we look forward to what that year presents and ultimately what we look forward to as the year progresses and beyond that. So James, how about we kind of set the stage a little bit today and talk about what exactly ChatGPT is? Do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure everybody's seen the buzz on LinkedIn, everybody talking about it, but essentially what ChatGPT has done has allowed us to essentially automate a lot of the content creation tasks that have been going on. Essentially, it's creating, you give it a prompt and it gives you a human-like response using all of its acquired learned information through all the data that is available to the AI. So it's definitely, it's kind of hard to give a specific use case for it, and we'll get into all of the marketing specific ones today that we've been playing around with, but it's definitely been an absolute game changer, and I certainly expect it to take control of everybody in 2023. I mean, I think one of the big questions is going is like everybody talks about losing their job to AI. I think we're at a point now where there is certainly, you know, we've all joked about it in the past, but I think that there's a lot that's going to change as this new technology evolves.
Yeah, I mean, you actually asked ChatGPT what it is. And I think kind of just to add some context to how this thing actually operates, you know, it spit out a response that basically said that it works by training itself beyond a large neural network based off of a data set of human generated inputs ranging from books, articles, conversation, and obviously it has that machine learning that helps it iterate over the course of time to become more knowledgeable about subjects, a little bit more conversational when appropriate, things like that. But I think to your point, James, the conversation today is, you know, where is this taking us as marketers and where should we consider using it? But before we get into that, you know, do you want to talk a little bit more about any other kind of AI technologies that you might have come across, just to kind of take this a little bit beyond just ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple in the works for a while, and honestly, everything that's been out up until this point seems to have had like a more specific use case, right? Like there's AI out there that'll create custom images for you. There's stuff that creates copy, say you're writing a blog post, things like that. I think the interesting thing about ChatGPT is it has this functionality of, you know, it will perform tasks for you. It operates in a similar way to a search engine would, where if you're going for information, a how-to guide, like just stuff that you want to learn, all you have to do is ask the questions and it spits out the answers. And, you know, I think that the great thing about this is it is a much more general use case that everybody has access to. Also, right now, it's completely free for everybody in their beta format. I certainly expect that to change, but it may not if they find other ways to monetize it. But it's like I said, this is the most generic use case that anybody can use as of right now, where everything else has been more specific historically.
Well, I think the other thing too, just to kind of add on to that, is we're talking about a very specific program as it exists today, being founded and operated under OpenAI as that parent company. But in reality, these mechanisms, these softwares have existed for a while now, right? We have Alexa, we've got Siri, we've got Cortana for Windows. So it's not like it's earth shattering in that way, right? I think it's a little bit different in the outputs more so than the understanding. And I think to that end, right, you had mentioned before, as marketers, should we be basically threatened that AI is going to take over us? Or I guess if we want to go Terminator route, the world. I don't know if we're going to be talking about Skynet necessarily today, but I think one of the things that you bring up is a good point, right? As I'm looking forward as a marketing leader, and in my case, an agency owner, what role does AI and ChatGPT potentially play into my staffing, my strategy, my content creation for myself, our team, our clients, right? And really thinking a lot bigger picture, does it replace people? Does it replace humans either over the next year, looking forward? I don't know. Do you want to kind of jump in on some of those thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective so far, I don't think it is going to replace any people in the immediate time. I think it's going to certainly change how quickly we have to output content information, because it provides prompts, information at a rate that nobody has ever seen before. So, a research project that typically would take weeks, you could have this spit out all the information in a matter of minutes. Now you have to go in, verify all of that information, verify that research, and do your due diligence. And this is like where there's still a lot of value in having that human review, because the content is fairly generic at the end of the day, but it is putting it out at a quality level that most people wouldn't know the difference. And that's the scary part.
I think to that end though, too, to your point, it's putting it out in a generic sense. And at the same time, the human element is still required to expound upon it. Right? It helps kind of create a baseline of information, but what the output really reminds me of more than anything is the most basic blog post that somebody's going to create to hijack an answer box on Google search. That's the output that it reminds me of. And what I also think is the thing here is that, look, whether we're talking about robots, AI, humans, how their neural links come into play, things like that, in the grand scheme of things, humans are going to always be an important cog in the wheel of the marketing system. They have to be, because of the intelligence that they have to bring, the emotional states, the empathetic states. We've talked about that in the past on this podcast as it relates to especially B2B marketing. But I think there's ways in which marketers can absolutely start to leverage AI and especially ChatGPT over the coming year, at least from that experimental perspective and testing and learning and how it can help augment or offset maybe laborious tasks, create a little bit more efficiencies, all of those things that, might ultimately become barriers or challenges to going to market for some brands, right? Instead of spinning your wheels, how can you use tech, especially an open source piece of tech such as this, to help overcome some of those challenges? So let's talk about kind of how brands can start to get started with AI, but especially ChatGPT in the coming year. James, do you want to talk about some of those use cases? And I know you've played around with it a lot to see kind of how those use cases might play out.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, like you said, I've spent hours, days, most of my winter break with this, because tell a little story. Like a lot of I coach football on the side. A lot of my friends are teachers, and I was asking them questions on like, have they heard about this? And I was kind of like showing off what it could do, because think about, one of the big features that's kind of scary in the education space is, you need to write a 5,000 word essay on a specific topic that's a research-based topic, right? And what ChatGPT is turning out is mostly original content. And instead of like plagiarism, which is the thing that you used to have to worry about, people copying each other's work, now it's somebody had this essay written for them in 25 seconds, 5,000 words. The first one we did was like, what's the history of dodgeball? And it gave like this huge specific example. And while the content was pretty generic, it was all accurate, very well written, and it was accurate and good enough for the common person not to be able to realize that this is I don't even say the common person. I think you need to have, after reading like a lot of these, I've started to be able to see what's automated and what's not, but right now most people can't. So in the marketing space, it's about the amount of quality content that people are going to be able to start to put out is going to be 10 times more than it has been in the past. For example, if I have writer's block, right? Writer's block is probably the biggest problem that creatives have, or any sort of like creative block. And you're just like, hey, this is the podcast topic we want to do. Can you write me an outline? And it spits out, it'll give you a perfect outline. Obviously you want to go in and change and adjust based on your personal opinions and thoughts, but like that writer's block is immediately gone, like that outline block, because now I have an outline, be like, oh, okay, well, this talking point is not really a good one for me, but it does spark an idea of something else. And now you can put out 10 times more content. I made the joke to my wife the other day. I was like, maybe I'll write a book this year, because I could just have it outline it, have it write 90% of it, and then I just do the editing essentially, and editing and personalization, and it'll still come off as 100% original. So it's definitely really powerful from the content side of things. And that's everything from long form content, short form content. And I think the big thing that's going to be hard to come to terms with is like on the SEO side, people are going to be able to put out way more content. Are the search engines going to adapt to favor original content versus AI generated content? How are they going to know the difference? Like that's going to be got to be a huge topic for 2023. And then on the social side, like you can take long form content and like repurpose it into, hey, like this is a blog post that we wrote, like write me a tweet, write me a LinkedIn post, write me a whatever. And, it'll just spit out that information for you. So, to kind of like like content is going to be a huge thing that's going to change from this. And it's certainly how that content is applied. That's going to be what marketers really have to focus on moving forward.
But it is more informational and educational in output than emotional, which is why I was mentioning before that human element. And to your point too before about your joke about writing a book with adding personalization, like that's the human element that has to come into play. And I guess when you think about it, there is a level of similarity here between obviously an open source AI platform generating content that you then need to personalize and build on and add your own flair to. And there's a similarity between that and having, a staff of copywriters perhaps doing that same thing where, they're going to create the baseline copy, they're going to outline the article for you, things like that. And ultimately you as the brand, whether that's being produced by an agency or in-house, you as the brand and the creative director, et cetera, needs to add that flair on top. The difference at the end of the day then is efficiency, right? Efficiency and going to market. We talked before about speed kills and going to market, and speed kills as far as making things happen and taking action rather than sitting on your thumbs and waiting to think about what that might be. So we talked about content creation there as a use case. You kind of touched on social a little bit. You want to talk about maybe on the paid side of things, how ChatGPT might come into play for a brand?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's really three things: keyword research, audience research, and copywriting. Copywriting, I think we hit on like, hey, write me some Google search copy, Google display copy, and it really gets those creative juices going a little bit. Again, you're going to have to adjust, you're going to have to whatever, but it already understands best practice. It already understands character limits. It already understands all of the stuff that typically goes into an ad. So it really is just an amazing content or copy ideation tool. audience research, I mean, that's a huge one. You can essentially pull from their database of like, hey, I have a B2B brand that specializes in HR software. Like, this is our ICP. Like, tell me more about it. And then you can, like, I think a big thing that, sorry, I feel like this is actually a good point to make. A big thing that is going to change with ChatGPT in the works is understanding the prompts that you need to give it. So it's going to be, everything's going to change from research and knowing things to, are you asking the right questions? And then, of course, your ability to verify that later. So, think of, we have a client questionnaire where we ask like all these questions. Like, we can plug in a brand and have them give a ton of that information already to us. Like, give us, this is the vertical that they're in, like, who are the competitors, and it essentially gives you all of that information. Now, in its current beta format, it only goes back to 2021. That's a whole different kind of perspective that you need to take and understand. But, a lot of the simple questions that you ask yourself in audience research, you can ask this tool and it's going to provide that information to you. You can ask it to cite relevant studies, relevant sources. Actually, this is not marketing related, but probably the coolest application that I've seen. And it just shows you, I feel like this is a good example that shows you how technical this can get. So when you go to the doctor and say you need a certain procedure that requires a referral, and sometimes what happens is your insurance won't cover that procedure because they're not necessarily, that the insurance company doesn't understand how that procedure is relevant to whatever's wrong with you. So typically what would happen is the doctor would have to write a letter to the insurance company. So now what you can do is what doctors are doing is they're having these letters essentially written for them saying like, hey, we're recommending XYZ for this patient. Can you write a letter to the insurance company outlining practical use cases in, actual medical, actual medical examples, right? So they're saying like, hey, like this procedure shows an 85% improvement in XYZ. And so this is the reason why we're recommending this specific procedure. So something where, and then they'll cite all of the specific medical cases where it's been used before. So now a doctor doesn't have to go into their book, research all of those, write the letter themselves, something that would take probably a couple hours, they're spitting out in a couple minutes. Now, again, of course, they have to verify that all of this stuff is accurate, but the tool already has access to all of that data so they can easily cite it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I just did is actually tossed, just to verify what you're talking about, I threw in a question about who some of the closest competitors are to one of our clients. And the response was a list of 10 of those brands, some of which I can verify myself, other ones I have to go and do the research for. But it basically, from my perspective, is basically just spitting out, whether it's the meta description and title or, some business listing as far as what those competitors do. But it does give out that list. Now I could keep asking it on the fly here, some of those questions that you were alluding to. And I am curious to see what responses it might come back to some of our questionnaire responses and questions that we ask of prospective clients of ours, because we go pretty in depth as far as internal knowledge and things like that. So I'm going to argue against what you're suggesting as far as it being able to answer a lot of things, especially kind of those nuances and internal knowledge that isn't publicly available or plugged in. So there is that. The other thing too that I think needs to be taken into consideration here is how brands actually use it and how much they customize on top of that foundational output. And here's what I mean by that. There's going to be plenty of people out there that are just going to plug in, an answer box question for Google search, strip out whatever ChatGPT says and throw into a blog post. And there's going to be 10 of those blog posts. And from what I've seen, there isn't that much differentiation between answers that this thing provides. And now you got a duplicate content issue, right? Now take that one step further, and how much does that affect the actual end user's interpretation and understanding of what is actually answering the question? Because if they're getting the same thing over and over again and it doesn't actually answer the question, then how good of content is actually being produced? Right? That's a big, big thing that I don't think this set of AI intelligence is actually able to do effectively yet.
And this is where it's about having unique prompts at the end of the day too. If you're just saying like, hey, what are the top 5 things I should consider in my B2B marketing strategy? Yeah, everybody's going to say the same thing and all of those posts are going to look the same thing. But if you're then starting to tailor and ask it more specific questions where like, can you take this post and then optimize it for SEO around this specific keyword, and then it rewrites the whole thing. Or you can start to take those 5 points and then break them down even further. There's a lot of, it's all about asking the right questions and breaking it down further. But I think, I wanted to jump back to something because you made a good point around, we can use this for audience research, right? Definitely a great application for it. But with targeting, we always talk about first-party data versus third-party data. So when we're doing this research, you're using third-party data. So your first-party data and what you know about your customers and your own customer research is still going to be the most valuable thing at the end of the day. Like that's not going away. I think some of the Gardner report stuff that everybody used to read and things like that, that's just going to become common knowledge that you can go to this tool and just ask it the questions and get the answers. And also just basic best practices stuff. Like I'll be like, sometimes clients ask us questions that we don't know the answers to, right? Like, I don't know, very specific, nuanced things and there's been a couple circumstances recently where I've taken the client email, plugged it into there, and it's given me the answer. I looked it up, validated it after, and we were good to go. But some basic things, they can just write the emails for you. Like, hey, this client needs ad specs for Google Display. Like, hey, can you write an email to XYZ client providing them with all of the ad specs for Google Display, outlining what the most popular sizes are? Boom, 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 30 seconds done, copy, paste. And that's where things are going to change. Things are going to get a lot more efficient. I think people are going to start to expect a lot more when it comes to the amount of content that's being put out, response times, like getting information, stuff that I think we're going to get to a point where hey, let me research that and get back to you email isn't appropriate anymore.
To an extent. The biggest thing, and I don't want to harp on it too much, is the fact that as marketers and brands start to use these tools, the market is going to get flooded with the same shit, just different days. So in reality, while the technology might be improving and the efficiency and rate of content should be increasing exponentially as a result, the quality of the content I actually see going backwards. And things like, having unique personal brands on LinkedIn, things like having point of views, right? Value props that actually set yourself apart, not just saving time and money, if we want to keep using that tagline, even in the new year. All of that matters more than anything, if not more than what it did before the emergence of these types of tools and really the proliferation of their uses. I think that is the thing that is most important here. And the thing that I go back to when we talk about, robots replacing humans and how do I look at my staffing if I'm a CMO, and, do I have AI replace an individual or an individual's role, or how do they kind of come into play and augment and offset some of those efficiency barriers or writer's blocks, as you pointed out effectively. They both have their time and place. They both have their opportunities. And when it comes right down to it, the need to test these out and see what they can actually do for your brand is where you start, right? That's where you start. And that's where you really set your wheels in motion to discover and understand whether an AI platform such as ChatGPT can have an impact on 2023 and your ability to execute or not.
I think the big threat that I see is to the point that you made of you have to make content that is unique to stand out. And as a marketer, you have to It's funny. I made this joke to our team, like, compare yourself to the machine, right? Like, you need to put yourself in a position professionally where you are providing value that can't be provided by something else, right? And I think that there are some things that are at risk of that. I think SEO is a huge one. I mean, I've taken several blog posts from random clients' websites and said, like, hey, here, optimize this for SEO around this keyword. And, I was just messing around, didn't give it that much of a prompt. And then I was like, they pulled back some content that was pretty good. And then my follow-up question was like, what elements did you consider when optimizing this piece of content for SEO? And it outlined 10 things that were spot on and accurate and basically our checklist for optimizing a blog post. Like it was dead on. So I think another thing that we can really do as marketers to make ourselves more efficient is we can use these tools to create all kinds of templates, like training templates for our employees. I know on our paid team, like we have an optimization checklist that we go through. That's just standard best practices for each platform of each of the elements that we should be looking at within the platform to optimize for. So like on the social side, like how is our audience performing? On the search side, negative keywords, stuff like that, right? And it essentially it'll build those checklists for you. And based off of all of the information that's out there and all of those checklists that are been put out from a million different sources, and develop one that you can just use and run with for training. So that's another way, again, to become more efficient. You spend less time putting together training materials, more time focusing on analyzing your first party data, and now you're a better marketer.
Yeah. And I think, before we get to kind of rounding out today's topic, I know we have a couple predictions that we each have as far as where ChatGPT and AI in general are taking us as marketers. I think let's close out this portion of today's topic with giving the audience, let's say, 3 things that they can do tomorrow to start testing the waters with ChatGPT. Do you want to go first, James?
Yeah, I would start with existing content projects that you have, say your blog, for example, or even a white paper. Prompt it with questions and see what it puts out for you. And then take that piece of content and make it your own and compare the difference. I think that could be anything from outlining a podcast, a blog post, a case study. I mean, a ton of information, and test the different prompts that it gives you and use that to help develop the content. That's the first thing that I would start with. And it's funny, this is a weird piece of advice, but you'll just find yourself asking more and more questions, and you'll get out of it what you want. I would almost go in with the expectation that it could do anything, and ask it the questions, and you'll quickly learn what it can and cannot do. You'll also be wildly impressed with what it can do.
So my recommendations for getting started are very similar to yours. First and foremost, look at your editorial calendar for we're in January, and have ChatGPT write at least the outline, if not foundational material for one of those blog posts. See what it comes back with. Build on top of it if it's good enough to be expounded on with personalization, customization, emotional and empathetic kind of language on top of that. And if it's not good enough, then play around with it a little bit more. Give it different prompts, as James suggested. Number 2, use it to create social content, specifically your post copy for LinkedIn, Facebook, if you use Twitter. Use it as an opportunity to create nuanced and more specific social media posting content, especially because you want to do that at scale and with the least amount of input and work as possible, right? Create efficiencies for yourself so you can churn out those content posts on social to have your brand and yourself as an individual be out there more. The third one is very content-esque as well, but more specifically to paid. Use it to create paid search copy and see what it provides. have your prompts and your inputs be obviously very focused around who you're targeting, the keywords, things like that, and especially for who you are as a brand. And again, use it as a test and learn opportunity to see what outputs it provides and creates, and what extra flair, if you want to call it such, you have to add on top that pushes features, benefits, value props that may not be public domain knowledge, that the tool may not take into consideration, whether it's your brand material and insights or the audience material insights that you have cultivated through your own customer feedback and research that you've done over the course of time. So I think those give collectively some good runway, some good ideas about how you can get started with tools, specifically ChatGPT, as we begin 2023 strong. Now let's talk about predictions. So James, I think you have a prediction around how this sucker is going to affect search.
Yeah, I think search is going to be the biggest thing to change. I think, we've been talking for a long time about the shift in the search engine space, right? Google historically being the largest search engine. You go there for everything. I saw a stat that I commented on LinkedIn earlier today that like 93% of purchases start with a search within a search engine. And like the question that I had is, one, I said that stat sounds dated to me, because unless you're considering all of social a search engine, because there has certainly been a serious shift, especially with younger generations, to having that original search happen on social. So I think what's going to end up happening is it's going to end up being split into 3 different segments now between social channels, and I'll include YouTube as a social channel, second largest search engine. So a split between social channels, actual search engines, and ChatGPT. And I think a lot of those informational based searches, like you said, the answer box stuff, people aren't going to go there for that anymore. So I think that there's going to have to be a shift around the type of content that you're creating for a search engine, because, I think as AI becomes more and more popular, those types of searches are going to move to AI, and Google is going to shift into essentially business listings, business content, local business content, like hours of operation, like all this, the typical like local SEO stuff that you deal with. And I think, I don't think that this is going to happen overnight. ChatGPT is literally in beta and learning more every day, but 2-3 years from now, I think that that's going to be a primary source that people go to for information, just based on how good it is so far in its its beta format. And it's learning more and more information every day. Every question that you ask it is more information that it's learning. So the more people that use it, the more information it learns. There's just going to be no reason to go to Google for basic searches anymore. So I think it's going to be difficult, that the content that people do go to search engines for is going to change. And I think it's hard to say exactly what people are going to go to Google for moving forward.
See, I don't agree with you on that one. And here's the reason why. People still go to Google despite Alexa, Amazon Echo, obviously just picking up your phone and talking to the microphone. All of those voice activated searches have existed for years now. And we've seen increases obviously in usage, especially when you have, the home products, whether it's, Echo, Alexa, et cetera, kind of coming into play. Obviously you see the increase in usage there, but Google by far, just the activity of going there and searching continues to be the behemoth as far as getting your answers to questions. And I don't see ChatGPT affecting the use cases as far as how you actually are getting the answers. I see it more so affecting the content that is populating those answers. And really what it comes down to is, how do these devices or solutions out there, we'll call it Google as a solution in this instance, how do they expound upon the information that is being produced? Because right now, I'll go on my phone and, my kids will be like, hey, I want to ask Google this question. Okay, fine. I turn on voice and they ask the question, and Google spits out whatever the answer box or the knowledge graph is saying. So it's already in place in that regard. The question is is Google going to give a more detailed response? And are they going to open up those responses a little bit more to include this more in-depth conversational search that ChatGPT might be providing, or isn't it? And I know before the holidays, or as things kind of were coming into the news cycle, I know Google did release some comment officially about them wanting and looking to favor human-generated content over AI-generated. Now, how they come to actually decide what the difference is, I'm curious to see how that's going to go. But they have already kind of taken those steps.
I think the big question there is like, where does ChatGPT get its information from? Because so far they've kept it vague. It's based on the database that they have available to them and their ability to learn, blah, 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 blah. But a lot of that stuff came from the internet somewhere, right? Which is put out by brands and news sources. News is not something that is going to go away. I think the main thing that's people are going to move to AI for is just answers to simple questions, not stuff that is sourced from, because that's the difference. It's not sourced from one single resource. It's sourced from what it knows and the information that it has available to them. So if you're looking for, just say you're reading a blog post of the top 5 B2B marketing tactics, right? That's, it's a source that you've decided to read and you've decided to trust, versus what AI is doing is taking all of the sources and developing a collective opinion across the board. I mean,
it removes bias, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it removes bias.
So like, it's kind of interesting because does that mean that like brand and building brand trust becomes more important because then you are a trusted source? Like, I don't know, you have the first party data that people want, that is the latest and greatest information, or do you just need like the general answer? Because AI is always going to be better at providing the general answer. Humans are always going to be better at providing the custom answer, the trust. You could be the trusted source for something.
Yeah. So my prediction is on top of what you just described then. What is the monetization strategy for ChatGPT? Right now it's open source, it's in beta, you can play around with it as much as you want. Someone's got to make money at some point. And what does that technology ultimately power? And what is the pay to play model that monetizes it? Are we talking about something very similar to Google search, but in a different realm where you're sponsoring your content, your answers, right? Or you're paying, OpenAI to sponsor something in a pay to play model, whether it's, hey, we're going to charge you X amount CPM for having your brand mentioned or being cited as the source for that answer, or the unbiased source, right? Whatever we want to call it. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing here is, where does it get to that point of either diverging into a monetization model or more of an open source, open market model, similar to, let's just say, the internet, right? The internet obviously has multiple ways to monetize it, but it is an open platform. Is that the direction of ChatGPT and kind of OpenAI, or where does it go the opposite direction that I was just mentioning?
No, it's interesting because that's what people are talking about the most. It seems like, if anything, it's going to move towards like a subscription model that people pay $10 a month to have access to, because what they're trying to do is keep it as unbiased as possible, so brands aren't taking over and buying slots. So I don't think it's going to end up working like that, because that's exactly what they're trying to avoid. And there's also belief that that's also what will start to make it dangerous, because it is it is a self-learning system. And if you start plugging in paid components, like, it's going to continue to self-learn on top of that. I mean, think of like politics as the example. I'm not going to give any specific examples, but one of the things that I was doing is plugging in controversial topics to see if it would give like an opinion. And there were some opinions that were it seemed to have given a non-answer and then a slightly leaning opinion on whatever the controversial topic was. And I think when you start adding pay to play into that, it's just going to really go downhill from there. So that's a scary piece. I hope they go with a subscription model or just a free model, but we're also they need to make money somehow.
And a subscription model, I think, kills the usage. It doesn't make it proliferate as much as it could.
Yeah.
So time to tell whether this is something that takes off, is a trend and a fashion trend, right? Or, how do you take advantage of it for your brand and your marketing endeavors? I know we talked a lot about that today. Specifically, we gave some ideas about how to get started with it, some trials, some test and learns, things that we've talked about in the past as far as having that mentality and methodology. So, James, any closing thoughts before we kind of wrap this sucker up?
No, honestly, it's been fun playing around with the tool so far. I think in the future, I would really like to get a guest on here who's an expert in the topic of AI to really dive deep into the details. So anybody listening or anybody knows anybody, I would certainly love to talk in more detail. Everything that we said today is from our personal experience of what I'll consider playing around with it. I think this would be a good one to follow up on in, say, 6 months from now and see where things have gone.
And to that end, I would welcome anyone that is testing it out, whether it's in the recommendations and suggestions we had or within your own organization and the challenges that you're being presented. Absolutely reach out to us. We'd love to hear about that, see where it takes us as far as providing additional insights and thoughts on top of what we talked about today. So with that being said, thank you again for tuning in today for another episode of Digital Banter. Like, subscribe. If anything comes up, connect with us on social, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday.